Tyrion Lannister turned away from the ramparts as the last glow of sunset faded over Blackwater Bay. His breath felt tight in his chest, and he wondered if it was simply the strain of the day, or if the air truly reeked of war's approach. He moved down the dimly lit corridor, taking small steps to keep from tripping on the uneven stones. A pair of gold cloaks passed by, sparing him only a cursory glance. Perhaps they saw him as one of Robert's advisors now, or perhaps they simply saw a dwarf not worth their trouble. In truth, Tyrion did not know if the men around him considered him a valuable ally or a traitor in waiting. One misstep could seal his doom. He reached the modest chamber Robert had assigned him. There was a single barred window overlooking an inner courtyard, a small bed and a table. It was no lavish suite befitting the son of Lord Tywin Lannister, but it was no dungeon, either. As a precaution, his own or the king's, he was not entirely sure. He latched the heavy wooden door from the inside. The room felt stifling, the day's heat trapped in the thick walls of the Red Keep. He wanted more wine, but the day's revelations were swirling in his mind so fiercely that he feared wine might only muddle them further. Since when have I shied from muddling, he thought wryly. Perhaps I'd be better off not seeing clearly what's about to happen. Tyrion sank onto the edge of the bed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. His sister Cersei was under guard, his brother Jaime was likewise confined, and the Lannister influence at court had been all but uprooted in a single day. Somehow Tyrion had become a linchpin in King Robert's new arrangements. Ned Stark was watchful and had not trusted him for an instant, at least not on personal grounds, but Robert seemed to want to make use of Tyrion's knowledge and cunning. And so Tyrion now lived in the uneasy space between the king's uncertain favor and the hand's quiet distrust. He suspected he was safe only because Robert needed him. The moment that need vanished, Tyrion might find himself in the dungeon beside Cersei and Jaime, or worse. He leaned back against the pillow and stared at the torchlight dancing on the ceiling. It flickered, as uncertain as everything else in the Red Keep. Already in the halls, he had overheard hushed talk of how Lord Tywin might respond. How he might march on King's Landing, or lay siege to it, or cut off the city's supply lines from the west. Tywin Lannister was a formidable commander, the richest lord in the Seven Kingdoms, a man whose alliances and gold could buy half the swords in Westeros. If the king and the hand believed they could keep him at bay without a major war, they were either very optimistic or very foolish. With any luck, Tyrion might find a way to convince them to negotiate. It would not be easy. Robert and Tywin had never truly been friends, and after this they were likely to be sworn enemies. But if war did come, it would be the realm that suffered. He thought, too, of Sansa and Arya Stark, those two northern girls. One gentle and starry-eyed, the other fierce and restless. The innocence in them felt profoundly out of place here, where knives slid between ribs at the faintest whiff of advantage. Ned Stark would want them to be safe, no doubt. Tyrion supposed that, if the worst happened, the girls could be hostages or bargaining chips. That notion twisted unpleasantly in his gut. He disliked the thought of children thrown into the jaws of political strife. But that was the world they lived in. His father had once said, "None are free from the Game of Thrones, not even babes in the cradle." A dour lesson, but true. Eventually, exhaustion claimed Tyrion. He loosened his doublet, curled on the hard mattress, and drifted into a restless doze filled with half-formed dreams of red-haired girls running from a golden lion, and of a monstrous throne made of swords that melted into a sea of molten gold. When he woke, heart pounding, the chamber was pitch dark aside from the dying glow of a single candle. He did not know how much time had passed. A voice echoed in his head. Something's happened. He sat up, damp with sweat. His mouth felt parched, his tongue coated in dryness. He reached for the cup by the bedside, a small measure of water, and drank. Somewhere in the castle, a raven screeched. Torchlight glimmered beneath the door, then vanished. He heard footsteps in the corridor. The hour must be late, yet the Red Keep did not rest. He wondered if Varys or Littlefinger were scurrying through the labyrinth of passageways, collecting secrets like spiders collecting flies. You needed no illusions about them. Each had his own agenda, always. Tyrion doubted either man had expected events to unfold so quickly or so dramatically. In the original tangle of intrigues, Ned Stark would have discovered Cersei's secret too late, only to be arrested or killed. Now everything was reversed, and the entire tapestry of King's Landing had been unraveled in a single day. He collapsed onto the bed again, trying to will himself back to sleep. Another hour or two of rest, he thought, or he would be useless come morning. And morning would bring fresh perils. Eventually, he drifted off once more. He woke to a knock at his door, a sharp series of raps that suggested impatience. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the grit of poor sleep. Dawn's light seeped through the barred window, painting the chamber in pale gray. He tugged on his tunic, ran a hand through his messy hair. "Enter," he called, unlatching the door from the inside. A gold cloak stepped in, helmet tucked beneath his arm. "The king summons you, my lord." At once, Tyrion recognized him as one of the men who had stood guard over the throne room the previous day. His name was Luther or Luther. Tyrion wasn't entirely sure. "Then I won't keep the king waiting," Tyrion replied, clearing his throat. His voice emerged rough. He needed water or wine or both. He followed the soldier through the corridors of the Red Keep, noticing that the usual bustle of courtiers at sunrise was subdued. Perhaps they still reeled from the shock of the Queen's arrest. The air lay hot and still, with only faint breezes stirring the banners. They reached Robert's Solar and Luther knocked. A muffled "enter" came from within. Inside, King Robert sat at a table covered in scrolls, letters, and half-empty cups of wine. Ned Stark stood by the narrow windows, arms folded, looking as though he'd slept little. Renly Baratheon leaned against the back of a chair, deep in thought. Ser Barristan Selmy stood as sentry near the door, his white cloak spotless despite the city's dust. Tyrion bowed, or something close to it. "Your Grace," Robert exhaled. He appeared rumpled, eyes slightly bloodshot, though he no longer reeked of drink the way he had the day before. Perhaps Ned had made sure he moderated himself. "Sit," the king commanded. "We've matters to discuss." Tyrion took a seat opposite Robert. Ned watched him with quiet scrutiny, as if uncertain whether to treat him as a guest or a prisoner. Renly gave Tyrion a curt nod, acknowledging the dwarf's part in the revelations. "Tywin Lannister has received word by Raven," Robert said abruptly. "Or so our spies tell us. A raven was sent from the city in the middle of the night, likely by some loyal Lannister retainer, or perhaps by Pycelle. Gods know who. The point is, Tywin will know by now what's happened, that I've seized Cersei and Jaime." Robert pressed a hand against his brow. "We can be certain of his reaction. The question is how swiftly he'll muster his forces." Tyrion rested his elbows on the table, lacing his fingers. "Lord Tywin is nothing if not efficient, Your Grace. He has gold enough to raise an army swiftly and effectively. The Westerlands can field a formidable force, easily 20,000, if not more. He may also reach out to potential allies. House Frey, perhaps, or the Tyrells of Highgarden, if he can promise them something enticing. It's hard to say whether they'd side against the crown, but my father's coffers can make strange bedfellows indeed." Ned's jaw tightened. Even the Tyrells would not openly rebel without cause. They're proud, but they're also pragmatic. They supported you in the rebellion, Your Grace. Robert sighed heavily. "I've no appetite for another rebellion, but that's exactly what we might be facing. War with the Lannisters is no small thing, especially if they buy support from other great houses. Stannis is not here yet. Even if he arrives, the man is difficult." Robert glanced at Renly, who stiffened. Renly pursed his lips. "You should place your trust in me and in the Stormlords, brother. We can gather a strong host from Storm's End, Tarth, Haystack Hall, the Rain House, enough to bolster the crown's might. Besides, the Tullys are sure to side with us if they believe the Lannisters are traitors. Lord Hoster Tully is father to Catelyn Stark and Lisa Arryn. Blood ties might matter." Ned nodded. "I can send word to Riverrun. My wife would encourage her father to stand behind the king. The Vale, however, is in the hands of Lisa. She has proven reclusive, But if she is reminded of how her husband Jon Arryn died, perhaps she'll not stand idle if the Lannisters are implicated. Still, Robert said, turning to Tyrion, I want your insight into your father's next steps. Think as he would think. Gods know Tywin never does anything by half measures. Tyrion drew a slow breath. He felt all their eyes on him, some suspicious, some hopeful. My father will be furious, Tyrion said carefully. He will see your arrest of Jaime and Cersei as a profound insult to House Lannister. Pride drives him as much as duty, but he's also coldly calculating. He'll weigh the cost of war against the possibility of negotiation. The question is what you intend to do with Jaime and Cersei. If the plan is to execute them for treason, Tywin will almost certainly raise an army. He will not let his heirs be put to death without a fight. If, however, you offer terms some form of leniency, he might consider negotiation. Maybe. Robert scowled, the muscles in his neck bunching. Leniency? Why should I show leniency to the woman who bedded her own brother to cuckold me? The man who fathered her bastards. They deserve an execution. The whole realm will see how I deal with traitors. Ned spoke softly. Your Grace, if you mean to punish them, so be it. But Tyrion is correct that it would spark open war. We must decide if we are prepared for that. The cost in blood would be high. Renly shifted uncomfortably. Besides, brother, you've said yourself you don't relish the idea of harming the children. Yet if we kill their mother and father, House Lannister might retaliate in ways we can't fully predict. Perhaps we could use them as hostages to keep Lord Tywin in check. Robert glared at his younger brother. Hostages in our own city. So the realm sees me hold my own wife as a prisoner for life? Is that any less humiliating than killing her outright? The lords might say the king is weak, that he lacks the stomach to punish a traitor. He made a sound of frustration. I never wanted this damned crown to begin with. Ned inclined his head, respectfully acknowledging the king's torment. Then he turned back to Tyrion. If Tywin is so prone to war, how can we prevent bloodshed? Tyrion's mind clicked through possibilities. One path is to publicly disinherit Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, labeling them Lannister bastards. That alone would wound my father's pride, but not as grievously as an execution might. You would, of course, remove them from the line of succession and name Stannis as your heir or Renly should you choose. But you could spare the children's lives, and perhaps keep Cersei and Jaime imprisoned without delivering a death sentence. Then you open negotiations with Tywin. In exchange for peace, perhaps the king would show mercy, commuting the death penalty to permanent confinement or exile. In time, perhaps Myrcella and Tommen could even be married into other families, forging alliances. Tyrion paused, measuring Robert's stony expression. It's not a pleasant path, but war is seldom pleasant. Robert's mouth twisted. Exile them all to Essos, then? Let them live out their days in Pentos or Lys, far from my sight? It's not the justice I want, but it may be the justice the realm needs. Ned watched Tyrion with cool gray eyes. That might still not satisfy Tywin. He'll see it as spitting on the family name. But it could buy time for us to gather strength, and for him to consider if war is truly worth the risk. Renly, arms still crossed, nodded once. Better that than a hasty plunge into carnage. But we should also consider the possibility that Lord Tywin will attack no matter what. The name Lannister must not be trifled with, and Tywin might feel compelled to avenge this insult. Robert thumped his fist on the table, rattling the wine cups. Damn him. Let him come if that's what he wants. Let all the lords gather and see who's truly king. But I will not cower in fear of Tywin Lannister or his gold. I'll prepare for war. Yet, I suppose I could delay executing Jaime and Cersei if it means avoiding a siege. The king inhaled sharply, as if the thought of letting them live was a physical wound in his side. Tyrion could not miss the hatred that burned in Robert's eyes. This was no idle matter. If Robert ever found cause or opportunity, he might well slit Jaime's throat himself. But for now, at least cooler heads were prevailing. Or so Tyrion hoped. A knock at the door broke the tension. Ser Meryn Trant of the Kingsguard entered, bowing. "Pardon, your grace. Lord Baelish requests an audience. He says he's learned something of great importance." Robert gave a growl. "Little finger. Fine, let him in." Moments later, Peter Baelish stepped inside. He moved with a dancer's grace, wearing a subtle smile, as though the entire realm had not been shaken to its core the previous day. He made a flourish of a bow. "Your grace, my lords, I trust one don't interrupt anything too dire, or too secret." "Speak," Robert snapped. Baelish's eyes flicked over Tyrion for the briefest moment, lingering on the dwarf as if re-evaluating him in light of this new order of things. Then he returned his focus to the king. "I've just received word from my various informants in the city. Last night, an urgent message was sent west, presumably to Lord Tywin. A second message has also flown, likely to your brother Stannis on Dragonstone." "Who would be sending to Stannis?" Ned asked. Baelish lifted one shoulder. "Possibly the Grand Maester, possibly Varys. Or Varys might have arranged it through an unwitting messenger, though the spider is crafty about covering his tracks. In any case, the message presumably carried news of the Queen's arrest and the charges of bastardy." Renly exchanged a glance with Robert. "Stannis might come at once, then, expecting to claim the throne if your grace disinherits Joffrey." Baelish offered a slight inclination of the head. "More interesting, though, is that I've heard from a pair of sellswords who frequent my establishments in the city. They claim there's already talk among certain disgruntled Lannister men-at-arms about trying to free Jaime Lannister. They speak of ways to slip him out of the Red Keep under cover of night. I doubt they have enough men to attempt it openly, but they might try a stealthy approach." Robert's eyes blazed. "They'll not succeed. I'll double the guard." Ned's expression grew grave. "We should reinforce the watch on both Jaime and the Queen. If Lannister men can't free them, they might kill them to keep them silent, or to deny you your hostages. The Lannisters might prefer dead kin to living captives, if it serves their cause." A chill silence fell. The notion of Cersei or Jaime being murdered by their own loyalists to spark war was not impossible. Tywin Lannister was not known for sentimentality, especially if losing one or two children meant strengthening his position. Tyrion felt a coil of dread in his belly. Would his father do that? Perhaps not. Tywin, for all his cruelty, treasured Jaime as the golden son. But if Cersei, or even Tyrion himself, was a liability to House Lannister's power, Tywin might consider them expendable. Robert scrubbed his face with a heavy hand. "I'll see to it that the guard is doubled. Ser Barristan, you see to it personally. And Ned, keep your own men near them as well. No slip-ups." "Of course, your grace," Barristan said. "I'll ensure no one passes my watch unchallenged." Baelish coughed softly, drawing their attention back. "There is another matter. The small council is in disarray. We have lost the Queen's influence. The Grand Maester is under suspicion. Lord Varys remains elusive. We should consider reorganizing the council if we are to maintain order. The city is uneasy. If war does come, chaos might erupt in the streets." Ned's mouth tightened. "Lord Baelish, if you have suggestions, speak them plainly." Baelish smiled a sly, thin smile. "Well, for one, you need a new Master of Whispers, or at least someone to monitor Varys. Or you could keep Varys in place if you trust him. I do not presume to instruct the king, but I have a modest network of informants and would be happy to help in that regard." His tone dripped with an almost feigned humility. "I might also serve as Master of Coin in full capacity, if your grace wishes to formalize what was once the Queen's oversight." Robert waved a dismissive hand. "Fine. We'll hold a formal council meeting tomorrow. If you want the coins so badly, they're yours. But I expect no treachery. Baelish." "I'm in no mood for your japes." Baelish bowed. "Treachery, your grace? For me, I'm cut to the quick." He turned that mocking expression on Tyrion for a moment. "Lord Tyrion, how splendid to see you sitting in on these high councils. You've certainly had a remarkable ascension." Tyrion smiled without humor. "Life can change quickly in King's Landing. You of all people know that." Baelish offered another little bow, then departed, leaving the tension in his wake. Robert pushed himself to his feet. Enough. I've had my fill of talk. Ned, Tyrion, if you have any proposals for dealing with Tywin Lannister, put them in writing or speak with me after midday. I'll be in the yard, working off this damned headache with my hammer if I can find the strength. Ser Barristan, see to the security. Renly, help me put on some armor so I can at least break a sweat. With that, the meeting dispersed. Ned gave Tyrion a final, searching look, then followed the king out. Tyrion lingered a moment, inhaling the stale air. He imagined the realm as a board of painted tiles, each tile a kingdom or a house, each tile shifting precariously. All it would take was one misstep, one spark, and all would collapse into violence. He half wondered if he should flee the city, slip out in the night, yet he doubted he'd get far with Robert's men watching him. Better to stay close and remain indispensable. He left the solar. Outside, the corridor was cooler. He moved through the castle, passing a courtyard where, indeed, Robert was strapping a heavy hammer to his back while Renly helped him. The king was still a large man, though older and heavier than he had been during the rebellion. Tyrion wondered if Robert could still fight as he once had, if war truly came. He supposed they would find out soon enough. He made his way to the Tower of the Hand, that imposing stone edifice where Ned Stark had his quarters, but only to climb the steps to the level below Ned's own apartments. 2 gold cloaks guarded a thick wooden door. They recognized Tyrion, eyed him warily. "I'd like a war. With my sister," Tyrion said, surprising even himself. He wasn't sure why he felt compelled to speak to Cersei. Perhaps he wanted to gauge her mind, see if there was any way to temper her fury, or if she intended to burn down the castle around her. Or perhaps he simply sought closure, some explanation of how they had come to this pass. The guards exchanged glances. One cleared his throat. "She's not to receive visitors. Lord Stark's orders." Tyrion folded his arms. "I understand, but the king himself said I might be of use in negotiations. If I can get her cooperation, perhaps it will avert a war. Do you want to keep me out and risk thousands of lives? Or do you want me to go in, talk some sense into her?" The other guard hesitated. "We'd need approval from the Hand." A new voice spoke from behind Tyrion. "I'll grant it." Ned Stark approached, accompanied by 2 of his own men. He looked between Tyrion and the guards. "If Lord Tyrion thinks he can glean anything from the Queen, let him try. But I'll post my men in the corridor to ensure no mischief." Tyrion inclined his head. "As you wish, my lord." The guards nodded and stepped aside. Ned Stark signaled his own men to stay alert. Then he gave Tyrion a curt nod. "You'll have a quarter hour, no more. If she tries anything, if she attempts to escape or harm you, call out at once." Tyrion suppressed a tight smile. A quarter hour should suffice. He pushed the door open and stepped into a dimly lit chamber of modest size. The curtains were drawn, making the space feel claustrophobic. The bed in the corner was rumpled, and a small table held a half-eaten meal, untouched since the previous night. Cersei stood near the window slit, clad in a simple gown of gray linen, her golden hair loose around her shoulders. The finery, the jewels, all of it was gone, replaced by an austere garment that made her look more like a captive septa than a queen. She turned sharply at the sound of the door. Her eyes, green as wildfire, flared at the sight of Tyrion. "You?" she spat. "Have they sent you to gloat?" Tyrion shut the door behind him. The latch clicked, echoing in the silence. "I'm not here to gloat, dear sister." He kept his tone carefully neutral. "I came to see if there's any sense to be found in this madness." Cersei's lips twisted in a bitter sneer. "Sense? Coming from you? The twisted little demon that finally turned on his own family. You always hated me." Tyrion took a breath, refusing to let her barbs wound him. "Hate is a strong word, though you gave me no reason to love you. We both know that. But this is bigger than us now. Bigger than you and me, bigger than the family. We're looms. If you have any sense, you'll cooperate." She eyed him scornfully. "Cooperate how? By bowing to Robert's whim? By confessing my sins so the realm can stone me? I am the queen. Tyrion cocked an eyebrow. Former queen, you mean? Robert knows everything. He's decided to spare your life. For now. But he might not if you give him cause to doubt your compliance. Jaime is likewise at his mercy. You'd both do well to remember that. Cersei's hands clenched into fists at her sides, the knuckles whitening. He will regret keeping me alive. I swear it. Tyrion's lips formed a thin line. Do not think I am eager to see you harmed, Cersei, but if you keep making threats, you'll only push Robert to the point where he loses control. He was never the most measured of men, as you well know. Perhaps you should consider your children. They are alone, locked away, uncertain of their future. Unless you want them to share your cell, you might try to show a measure of contrition. Contrition? She hissed. It was you who gave Robert the secrets that doomed us. Do you think I don't know? I've heard how you scurried to him, squealing your knowledge like a rat for scraps of favor. Tyrion stiffened. She was not entirely wrong, but the impetus had been there, looming. Ned Stark was on the verge of exposing her as well. In a sense, Tyrion had only forced the matter before Ned Stark was arrested or killed. But explaining that to Cersei seemed pointless. She would hate him all the same. If not me, then Ned Stark would have done it. And then you'd have arranged his murder, or he would have arranged yours. This city would have erupted in blood. In some ways, I spared you that immediate violence. She advanced a step, the candlelight catching the fierce lines of her face. Don't you talk of sparing me. You've put Jaime in chains. You've torn my children's future away. They were to be rulers, Joffrey was to be king, Myrcella a princess married to some great lord, Tommen perhaps Lord of Storm's End. All that is gone, because of you. Tyrion frowned, guilt and anger warring inside him. They were never Robert's children, and you knew it. Perhaps you should have considered the risk. You played the game and lost. She shook with suppressed rage. For a moment, he feared she might lunge at him, try to scratch his eyes out. But she mastered herself, barely. If you think this is over, you're a fool, she said, her voice trembling with quiet intensity. Father will march. He'll tear the city apart stone by stone if he must. He will free Jaime and me, and then we'll deal with you as we please. Tyrion let the corner of his mouth cork up in something that might have been a sad smile. That depends on how quickly your father marches, and how many swords stand against him. There's a chance the king will offer terms. You and Jaime might live, the children might be spared. But if Tywin comes with fire and steel, a lot of people will die. Possibly including your children. Think on that before you yearn for a siege. She stared, breath coming in ragged draws, face twisted with contempt. But behind her eyes, Tyrion saw fear. She was no fool either. She knew a siege or a pitched battle in the Crownlands would be ruinous. And she knew Robert might well put her children to death if he felt threatened enough. Or keep them hostage for the rest of their lives. In King's Landing, anything was possible. Cersei exhaled, a hint of that arrogance seeping back into her features. You always flattered yourself clever, Tyrion. But no matter what you do, you'll never be anything but a twisted monster in the eyes of this realm. The king may use you, but he'll never trust you. And when father arrives, you'll have no place in the family either. Tyrion forced a shrug he did not fully feel. I'm used to being untrusted, sister. My life has scarcely changed in that respect. She gave a cruel laugh, though it sounded brittle. Get out, she said, turning her back on him as though he were beneath her notice. He studied her for a moment, the proud line of her shoulders, the trembling in her hands. In that instant, he almost felt pity. Cersei had always wanted power, perhaps because she felt powerless as a woman in a patriarchal society, forced to marry a man who never loved her. She had tried to carve a place for herself, but the means she chose, incest, lies, manipulations, were a dangerous game indeed. And now it had all come crashing down. Tyrion was not so heartless as to ignore the tragedy of it. Yet he could not forget how she had made his own life miserable time and again. He turned, stepping toward the door. If you care for your children, he said quietly, you might try listening to reason. Neither your pride nor mine should matter more than their lives." Then he left, shutting the door behind him. Outside, the guards looked at him curiously, but he only shook his head. Ned Stark was waiting at the far end of the corridor, leaning on the wall. Tyrion approached, adopting his most inscrutable expression. Ned spoke in a low voice. "Any improvement in her disposition?" Tyrion sighed. "She's defiant, but not wholly blind to the risk that Robert might order her children harmed if Tywin attacks. I suspect fear for her children's fate is the best leverage we have." Ned dipped his head. "That may be so." Then he gestured for Tyrion to walk with him. The corridor was dimly lit by narrow windows, the morning sun slanting in. "I'll be writing to my wife soon, explaining events here, and to her father, Lord Hoster Tully. If the Riverlands support us against Tywin, that will be a formidable line of defense." Tyrion nodded. "Agreed. The more united the realm is behind Robert, the less likely my father will risk an open confrontation. But it won't be so simple, I fear." Ned regarded him with an unreadable stare. "Nothing is simple in this place. Still, you've played your part. I only hope it does not end in ruin for us all." Before Tyrion could reply, Ned turned away, heading down the stairs with that measured stride of his. Tyrion stood for a moment, alone, feeling the emptiness of the tower press in around him. Then he followed, descending into a day that promised heated disputes and uneasy alliances. The hours that followed were a blur of hurried conferences, messengers, and the slow, grinding machinery of royal administration. Robert commanded that Ser Barristan oversee the doubling of the guard around the Queen and Jaime. Ned sent ravens to Winterfell, Riverrun, and the Eyrie, requesting swift aid or at least a declaration of loyalty in the face of potential Lannister aggression. Renly took it upon himself to reach out to the lords of the Stormlands, reminding them that House Baratheon was their liege and they should be prepared to muster in the king's name if war came. Littlefinger busied himself with the financial accounts, ensuring gold could be raised for the city's defenses, though how sincere his efforts were could never be fully known. Varys appeared and disappeared like a wraith, quietly telling Robert that he remained loyal, though few believed him entirely. Tyrion drifted among them, offering counsel where he could, reminding them of Tywin's tactics. How he might send marauding forces to harass supply lines, how he might bribe lesser lords along the Crownlands or the Riverlands to turn cloak, how swiftly his armies could move if he gave the order. He explained that Tywin might hire the services of the Golden Company or other Sellsword groups in Essos if he needed more troops than the Westerlands alone could provide, though that seemed a more desperate measure. When asked if he truly believed Tywin would risk a full-scale rebellion, Tyrion answered with cautious uncertainty. "If my father sees no better path, he may indeed. He does nothing by halves." All across King's Landing, the people sensed the change in the air. The markets bustled with frantic energy as merchants tried to sell off goods or raise prices, anticipating shortages. Recruits for the City Watch were drilled in the yards. The Red Keep bristled with uneasy soldiers who listened for any rumor of Lannister loyalists stirring within the city. The lords and ladies of the court kept to themselves, unsure which way the wind might blow. Some had aligned themselves closely with House Lannister under the Queen's patronage. What would become of them now? Sansa Stark spent her days in a haze of confusion and tears, her betrothal to Joffrey in question. Arya wandered the small courtyard with restless fury, practicing with a wooden sword under the watchful eye of Syrio Farrell. They both asked after their mother, or after news from Winterfell, and Ned gave them only patient reassurance that all would be well. Whether he believed that, Tyrion could not say. But at least Ned tried to keep them from the heart of the storm. On the third day after Cersei's arrest, a raven arrived bearing Tywin Lannister's reply, or rather, his ultimatum. Tyrion learned of it when Ned Stark summoned him to the Tower of the Hand again, along with Robert, Renly, Ser Barristan, and Littlefinger. The scroll, bearing the seal of the Golden Lion, lay on a table for them all to see. Ned read it aloud in his cool, steady voice. "To King Robert of the House Baratheon, first of his name, etc. I have received your notice of my children's confinement. I consider these actions a gross injustice against House Lannister, rooted in vicious lies and slander. Jaime Lannister is the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, sworn to protect your throne. Cersei Lannister has served as your queen, bearing children you have long acknowledged as your heirs. Your accusations of incest and treason are base and unproven, and your treatment of them is an insult that cannot be borne. Should you fail to release them immediately and restore their good name, House Lannister will have no choice but to protect its honor by all means necessary. By the time you read this, our banners will have been summoned. Reflect on the gravity of what you have done. If you do not relent, the realm shall pay for your error in blood. Lord Tywin of House Lannister. Robert snorted, anger smoldering in his dark eyes. By all means necessary, the old lion roars indeed. Renly grimaced. He doesn't even try to hide his threat. He's calling his banners at Casterly Rock. If we do nothing, they'll march east soon. Ned set the letter aside. He calls the charges unproven, which is no surprise. He's appealing to the tradition that the king's children must be presumed legitimate unless proven otherwise. But we have confessions, if need be. Confessions from the queen's own mouth, Robert growled. And from that vile Kingslayer too, if we squeeze him enough. Hell, we have the imp's word. Tyrion cleared his throat sharply. Your Grace, my father will say my word is worthless in this matter, as I stand to gain from House Lannister's downfall. Not that it's true, but that's how he'll frame it. He'll say you forced a confession from Cersei under duress. As for Jaime, well, my father might claim you tortured him or threatened him with torture to invent such a confession. Tyrion paused. In short, Tywin can spin any proof we offer as coerced. Robert glowered, frustration etched into every line of his face. It doesn't matter. I know the truth. He's challenging me. Very well, I've never run from a fight. We'll see how he fares against the might of the crown. Ned exchanged a look with Renly. How many men can we raise quickly to defend the city or move westward if need be? Renly answered, the city watch stands at around 2,000 men, plus your household guard, Ned, and Robert's loyal knights. With notice, the Stormlands can muster another 8 to 10,000. If the Vale or the Riverlands join, that adds significantly more. But if Tywin moves swiftly, he might strike before we have them assembled. Ned nodded. We'll send urgent ravens. We must rely on the loyalty of the realm to the king's cause. If the realm sees the Lannisters as traitors, we'll have the advantage in numbers. And if the realm wavers? Littlefinger asked quietly. Some might wait to see how the winds blow. Lord Tywin is known for repaying debts, both friendly and unfriendly. Many will fear him more than they love the king. Robert's anger flared. Let them cower, then. I'll remind them that I toppled the Targaryens from their throne. Tywin Lannister is no dragon, and I'll show him the same mercy I showed Rhaegar on the Trident. That grim pronouncement stilled the room. Tyrion remembered well the tales of Robert's feats in the rebellion, how he had shattered Prince Rhaegar's breastplate with a single blow of his warhammer, scattering rubies in the river. Robert had been unstoppable then, fierce and young. Now he was older, heavier, but perhaps no less dangerous if roused. Finally, Tyrion asked, is there any chance we try the path of negotiation? Offer to let Cersei and Jaime live, perhaps exiled, in exchange for Tywin standing down. Robert looked ready to roar his dismissal, but Ned spoke first. It may be the best chance to avoid a large-scale war. We keep the evidence, we disinherit Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, but we spare them. In that case, Tywin might keep his banners raised in a show of force, but refrain from marching if he believes the king might see reason. Robert clenched his jaw, glaring at the letter from Tywin. The arrogant cur demands I release them outright. He doesn't even ask for exile. He wants them restored to full standing. Which is impossible, Ned said. Not after they've confessed to treason, but we might propose a compromise. We spare their lives, keep them in custody, and allow them, perhaps, to take the Black or go across the Narrow Sea. Then we negotiate with Tywin on that basis. Renly shrugged. It's a long shot. Tywin likely wants them reinstated fully, or else he'll come. The man is known for his pride. Tyrion shifted in his seat. He is indeed, but we also know he is not a fool. If he sees no path to victory, or if victory is too costly, he may relent. Especially if it means saving Jaime, whom he values above all else. Robert gave a curt nod. So we send a raven back. Let him know we won't free them to roam the realm as if nothing happened. But we'll not kill them either, provided he disbands his armies. If he so much as crosses the border of the Crownlands with an armed force, I'll be the one to carve out his heart. Robert slapped a hand on the table. Write it, Ned. Make it plain. Then we'll see how Tywin answers. Ned bowed his head. I'll compose the letter at once. Tyrion could feel the undercurrent of inevitability thrumming in his bones. A single letter might not be enough to avert bloodshed. Tywin was raising his banners. The West would soon be aflame with warlike fervor. The realm was vast and prone to fracturing. Still, they had to try. That evening, Tyrion dined alone in his chamber. The castle's tension robbed him of appetite, but he forced down some bread and a cup of watered wine. Outside, the sun was setting behind a haze of clouds, turning the sky a bruised purple color. Over the rooftops of King's Landing, crows circled, black silhouettes against the fading light, an omen, perhaps, of carrion to come if war broke out. Tyrion tried to shake off the sense of dread. He found himself thinking of Jaime, imagining his brother cooped up in a cell, seething at the injustice of it all. Though from Robert's perspective, there was no injustice. He considered going to see Jaime, as he'd seen Cersei, but decided against it. Jaime might be more inclined to speak with his fists or attempt to, though unarmed, than to exchange words. Perhaps in a few days, if tempers cooled, Tyrion would try. Time crawled. Each day brought fresh rumors. Tywin's forces mustering near Lannisport, smaller banners rallying, sellswords rumored to be hired. Meanwhile, the Crown tried to gather its own allies. The Vale, with Lisa Arryn in charge, offered only vague promises. Riverrun seemed more certain to stand with the Crown, thanks to Ned's ties. The Stormlords would follow Robert or Renly if war was formally declared. The Crownlands themselves were largely loyal, though some houses had historical ties to the Lannisters. Stannis Baratheon remained an enigma. He had not yet arrived from Dragonstone, nor had he replied with any clarity to the king's summons. Tension soared. At last, after nearly a fortnight, another raven arrived, bearing Tywin's counteroffer, if it could be called that. Tyrion stood in the throne room's gallery as Robert read it aloud to the assembled lords and knights. The words were pure Tywin, cold, resolute, unyielding. He refused any compromise that called his children traitors. He demanded they be released, that their reputations be restored, that the king denounce the slanderous talk of incest, or else House Lannister would wage war. An uneasy murmur spread through the hall. Ned Stark shot Tyrion a look that was hard to decipher. Perhaps regret, or perhaps that quiet fury that underpinned so much of Ned's sense of honor. Renly muttered a curse under his breath. Barristan Selmy looked troubled, as though longing for a more chivalrous solution. Robert's face darkened with each line. By the time he was done reading, he bellowed, "So be it. If Tywin wants war, we'll give him war." The courtiers flinched at the king's roar. Robert had always been known to speak with a soldier's directness, but this was his most fearsome tone, reminiscent of the rebel who had brought down House Targaryen. "Send word," he continued. "We call the banners. Let every loyal lord to the crown muster in the Crownlands or the Stormlands. We'll show Lord Tywin what becomes of traitors." Ned tried to interject, "Your Grace, if there is any final gesture." "No," Robert thundered. "He insults me by demanding I release the very criminals who soiled my marriage bed and tried to place false heirs upon my throne. Enough talk. The time for steel has come." Thus ended the last faint hope for a bloodless resolution. Ned bowed his head, though Tyrion saw the flicker of sorrow behind his eyes. War meant thousands of lives, destroyed families, ravaged fields, famine, despair. But no one in that hall dared contradict the king's decree, not even Tyrion. As the lords and knights dispersed, hurrying to prepare for mobilization, Tyrion lingered near a pillar. He stared at the Iron Throne, the swords hammered together to form a monstrous seat of power. This is the seat that all men risk their lives for, he thought, the seat for which women commit treachery and kings shed blood. It looked neither comfortable nor welcoming, merely imposing, as though it devoured all who touched it. He felt a sudden urge to speak with Ned Stark. Perhaps the stoic Northern Lord might have some plan to prevent the worst. He stepped outside, scanning the throng of courtiers, and spotted Ned heading toward the Tower of the Hand. Tyrion followed at a discreet distance until they came to a quieter corridor. "Lord Stark," Tyrion called softly. Ned turned. His gray eyes studied Tyrion. "What is it, Lannister?" Tyrion spread his hands. "I only want to know if you truly mean to see this war through. Surely you know the cost better than most. Your father and brother died in the last great conflict, did they not?" Ned's face grew taut at the memory. "They did, and I have no love for war. But Tywin has given us no choice. The king will not yield, not on this matter." Tyrion swallowed, hating the truth of it. "I see. Then I suppose we brace for the storm. I only hope we can avoid the worst." Ned's gaze shifted. "I never thought I'd say this to a Lannister, but I appreciate your efforts to moderate this situation. Your father's pride leaves little room for compromise. Take care that you're not destroyed in the clash between him and the king." Tyrion gave a wry smile. "I appreciate the concern, my lord. I've grown rather attached to my head." Ned nodded curtly and continued on his way. Tyrion watched him go, wondering if the man had any cunning plan up his sleeve or if all paths truly led to bloodshed. He suspected it was the latter. His father was not called the Lion of the West for nothing, and Robert was not known for his gentle temperament. Two unstoppable forces, colliding. In the days that followed, King's Landing became a hotbed of martial fervor. The smithies rang day and night, forging swords and spears. The stableyards filled with fresh horses. The city gates teemed with minor lords arriving to declare loyalty or to watch and wait. The king drilled in the yard with his warhammer, cursing his aging limbs. Ned Stark met with the city watch, ensuring they were prepared for possible sabotage by Lannister sympathizers. Renly corresponded with Storm's End. A cautious hush spread through the taverns and brothels. The common folk could sense the kingdom tipping toward war, though some doubted the king would truly clash with Lord Tywin. To them, it seemed unthinkable that the realm could be so swiftly torn apart again. Amidst the gathering storm, Tyrion found himself unsettled by conflicting loyalties. House Lannister had been his home, even if most of its members scorned him. Jaime was in chains and Tyrion wanted to see him freed, but not if it meant the city sacked or thousands killed. Cersei he felt less pity for, yet a small part of him recoiled at the thought of her being executed. And if war came, would his father aim to kill Tyrion too? He could see Tywin disowning him entirely for siding with Robert. These tensions weighed on him, keeping him awake into the late hours, until he finally decided on a course of action. He went to Robert. It was evening, and the king was in his solar with a goblet of wine, reading dispatches. When Tyrion entered, Robert glanced up with hooded eyes. "What do you want, imp?" Tyrion stepped forward. "I have a suggestion. Another attempt at a peace offering, if you will." Robert drained his cup and poured another. "I'm tired of peace offerings that my lord father by marriage spurns." Tyrion dipped his head. "Understood. But hear me out. The best chance to defuse this is if someone can speak to Tywin in person. A messenger, an envoy. Letters can be disregarded or twisted, but a living envoy might at least gauge his mood. See if there is any softening. It needn't be a formal negotiation, just a final attempt to avert large-scale bloodshed." Robert studied him. "And who would that envoy be? One of my lords? He'd probably be flayed alive by Tywin for insolence. I'd not send Ned or Renly or any of my men to such a perilous mission." Tyrion spread his hands. "Send me." Robert let out a short, humorless laugh. You think Tywin would greet you kindly? You betrayed your own sister and brother." Tyrion offered a sardonic half-smile. "I know my father better than most. If there is any chance he'll listen, it might be to me. Besides, I'd wager my father wants to hear from me why I did what I did. He might not kill me outright if he thinks I can be turned to his cause. While that's not my intention, I can use it to buy time or glean information. Robert's eyes narrowed as he turned this over. And how do I know you won't switch sides the moment you set foot in Tywin's camp? Tyrion shrugged. You don't. But if I were going to side with my father, I'd hardly need to risk traveling to him openly. I could have plotted from within these walls, sabotaged your defenses. The fact that I stand before you now suggests I'm sincere about preventing this war. Robert pursed his lips, fidgeting with his empty cup. Even so, if Tywin kills you, that's hardly a blow to me. But if he uses you to feed me false promises, that might be worse than no envoy at all. Tyrion raised a brow. Then perhaps you'd prefer to send me with strict conditions. If I do not return by a certain date, assume the negotiations have failed, prepare for war. And if I come back with Tywin's acceptance, or at least a willingness to parley, it might be the best chance to end this short of a bloody campaign. Robert was silent for a long moment. At last he slammed the cup on the table. Ned will object. He'll say it's too risky, he thinks you're too cunning by half. But maybe cunning is what we need. He let out a sigh. All right, I'll consider it. Let me speak to Ned and Renly. So Tyrion waited. The next morning, Ned and Renly met with Robert to discuss the plan. Ned was not pleased, regarding Tyrion with that somber mistrust in his gray eyes. This is a gamble, Your Grace. Tyrion might be going to rejoin his father's cause, or Tywin might hold him captive. Either way, we learn little. Tyrion bowed slightly. With respect, Lord Stark, I have as much reason to fear Tywin's wrath as Robert's. If you doubt my loyalty, consider that I might be more loyal to myself than to either side. Therefore, I prefer a peace that keeps me alive. War puts me at risk from both directions. Renly looked intrigued. It's a bold move. If you do speak with Tywin, what can you offer? The king isn't about to release Jaime and Cersei unconditionally. Tyrion held up a hand. I'd offer a chance for them to live, likely in exile, rather than face execution. I'd also assure Tywin that the crown will not forcibly strip House Lannister of lands or titles if they stand down. In return, the children will be declared bastards and removed from the line of succession. Yes, but they can keep the Lannister name if that's a salve to pride. There's a chance Tywin might find that acceptable. Ned frowned. He's demanded they be restored to full honor. That's a far cry from letting them walk free as traitors. He might not budge. Tyrion met Ned's gaze. It's still worth one final attempt. So it was decided, albeit begrudgingly, that Tyrion would ride west under a flag of truce. He would carry sealed letters from Robert, guaranteeing his authority to negotiate certain terms. If Tywin refused to parley or threatened Tyrion's life, so be it. Robert would proceed with the muster of his armies. But if Tyrion could find some scrap of reason in his father's pride-bound mind, perhaps they could avoid the War of the Lion and the Stag, as the small folk were already calling it in hushed voices. Preparations took only a day. Tyrion acquired a small escort of 20 men from the city watch, commanded by a cautious sergeant. Enough to ward off bandits on the road, but not enough to pose a threat to Tywin's forces. He also arranged for decent horses and pack mules. The men eyed him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. None relished riding into the western lands under the Lannister banner, even with a truce. But the king's command was law. On the eve of his departure, Tyrion packed his things in a simple travel bag. He took a few changes of clothing, some gold for bribes or emergencies, a good cloak for cold nights, and a small stock of books for the road. He wondered if he was being foolish, risking his neck on a fool's errand. But the alternative was to watch the realm burn. As he made his final preparations, a knock sounded. He opened the door to find Arya Stark standing there, scrawny arms folded, wearing a determined expression. Her hair was askew, as if she'd just left some energetic sword practice. "What can I do for you, little wolf?" Tyrion asked gently. Arya lifted her chin. "I heard you're leaving. Father says you're going to talk to your father." She paused, eyes darting. I want you to tell him. Tell him we won't let them hurt Sansa or me. If he tries, Father will kill him." Tyrion fought a smile. The girl was plainly worried about the possibility that Tywin might retaliate, or that the war might lead to her or her sister being used as pawns. "I'll be sure to pass along that threat," he said, trying to keep his tone solemn. Arya frowned, uncertain if he was mocking her. "Just tell him. I'm not afraid of him." Tyrion nodded. "Very well, I will. But let's hope it doesn't come to that." Arya stared at him a moment longer. Then, as though satisfied, she turned and disappeared down the corridor. Tyrion closed his door, reflecting on the fierce hearts of the Starks. One day Arya might make a formidable opponent or ally to anyone who underestimated her. When morning arrived, Tyrion donned traveling leathers and met his escort in the courtyard. The sky was gray and sullen, as if the gods themselves disapproved of the mission. Ned Stark came to see them off, stoic in his furs. Renly was absent, perhaps overseeing musters or visiting the king. A few curious onlookers, including Baelish and Varys, watched from the sidelines. "You have the king's letters?" Ned inquired, his voice a low rumble. Tyrion patted his satchel. "Sealed and intact." Ned looked at him a moment, as though weighing whether to speak words of warning or farewell. In the end, he merely said, "May the gods help us all if you fail." Tyrion offered a small bow. "I shall do my best not to fail." With that, he mounted his horse, a sturdy chestnut mare more used to pulling a cart than a dwarf, but she seemed gentle enough. The city watch escort fanned out behind him, wearing cloaks of gold and carrying spears. The castle gates opened, and they rode out into the city streets. Onlookers gawked or shouted questions, but none interfered. As they made their way through the throng of merchants and peddlers, Tyrion heard hushed whispers. "That's the imp, going to see his father. War's coming, war's coming." They reached the city walls, passed through the gate, and set out along the Rose Road westward. The journey would take them through lands that might soon be contested. They would skirt the borders of the Reach, then pass by the fringes of the Riverlands to approach the Westerlands. If Tywin's forces were already marching east, they could meet them on the road. Tyrion hoped they would not encounter roving bands of Lannister outriders who might not honor the king's letter. But that was the risk. The men in Tyrion's escort rode warily, scanning the horizon. Though the grass was green and the sky had brightened since morning, the atmosphere felt charged with threat. On the second day of travel, they passed through a small hamlet that had heard rumors of war. The folk looked frightened, some packing carts, others stockpiling grain. Tyrion offered a few coins to an old woman who had lost her husband to bandits, hoping to spread some small goodwill. The men of the watch seemed uneasy about lingering too long. They pressed on. That evening, they camped by a shallow stream near a stand of ash trees. Tyrion joined the men around the fire, sharing a meal of salt beef and stale bread. The sergeant, a man named Rosen, cleaned his spear and asked Tyrion bluntly, "Do you truly think Lord Tywin will greet you as kin, or as a traitor?" Tyrion chuckled darkly. "Possibly both, dear sergeant. In my family, we have a gift for complicated feelings." Rosen frowned, but said nothing more. They slept under a half-moon, the wind whispering through the trees like a lament. Tyrion found little rest, haunted by thoughts of how the next few days might unfold. On the morning of the fourth day, they caught sight of a column of smoke rising ahead. Fearing it might be a village put to the torch, they approached cautiously. Instead, they found a band of travelers who had made camp. As Tyrion and the escort drew closer, a handful of armed men emerged. Their sigils were that of House Brax, a lesser lord sworn to the Lannisters. Tension crackled in the air. Rosen held up a golden banner to show they meant no harm, but the Brax men eyed them suspiciously. One among them, a knight with a silver mustache, stepped forward. "Who comes?" Tyrion guided his mare to the fore. Tyrion Lannister, envoy of King Robert, riding under a flag of truce to speak with Lord Tywin. "And you, sir?" The man blinked in astonishment. "Tyrion Lannister?" He exchanged a look with his companions. I am Ser Myron Brax. We march for the west, to gather at Casterly Rock under Lord Tywin's command. He sounded wary. We heard you exposed the Queen's indiscretions. Tyrion spread his hands. I am here to try to prevent a war, Ser Myron. If you stand in my way, you will only hasten bloodshed. Ser Myron studied him for a moment. Then he nodded. We have no wish to kill anyone under a truce. Lord Tywin has indeed called his banners, so we ride. He is some days to the west, massing an army near Ashmark. Go if you must. Tyrion offered him a curt bow. I appreciate the courtesy. They passed the Brax contingent without bloodshed. Tyrion noted the grim set of the men's faces, the clank of armor, the sturdy horses pulling wagons of supplies. War was no longer a rumor. It was real marching. To see men bearing the Lannister banner, but to be forced to regard them as potential enemies, twisted Tyrion's stomach in knots. They pressed on for 2 more days, passing fields of barley and wheat, crossing shallow streams and once a narrow, rickety bridge. Finally, near dusk on the 8th day since leaving King's Landing, they crested a rise and saw, on the far side of a wide valley, the flicker of campfires, dozens, perhaps hundreds, scattered like fireflies in the gloom. Flags of red and gold fluttered in the faint breeze. This had to be Tywin's host, or at least part of it. Rosen halted the column. There they are, he said quietly. We ride into their camp? Tyrion squinted at the mass of tents and fires. Yes, though we should go slowly and announce ourselves well before we're in arrow range. Remember, we carry a flag of truce. They descended the slope as darkness gathered, the gold cloak banner held high. Before they reached the outskirts of the camp, riders emerged to meet them, armored men with the Lion of Lannister on their surcoats. One hailed them, "Who approaches?" Rosen cleared his throat, calling out, "We come in peace, under the king's safe conduct. We have Tyrion Lannister, son of Lord Tywin, who seeks audience with his father." The riders conferred, then parted to allow Tyrion and his escort to pass between them. Torches flared, illuminating the men's faces. Stern, suspicious, some with a hint of astonishment. Tyrion led the way, heart pounding. Now that he was here, the reality of confronting Tywin Lannister in the midst of an army determined to fight the king was stark indeed. They threaded through the camp. Dozens of soldiers looked up from their fires to stare. Men paused in the midst of cooking or mending gear to mutter, "Is that the imp?" Others spat in the dirt at the sight of King's Landing's gold cloaks. Tension weighed heavily on the air, as if at any moment a single spark could ignite violence. But no one attacked, for the white banner of truce was visible in the torchlight. Finally, they reached a large pavilion near the center of the camp, guarded by men in gilded armor. Tyrion recognized House Swyft, House Marbrand, House Lydon among others, all prominent vassals of the Rock. A tall man with a close-trimmed beard stepped forward, one of Tywin's knights, named Ser Adam Marbrand if Tyrion recalled correctly. He regarded Tyrion with measured curiosity. "Lord Tyrion, we did not expect to see you." Tyrion dismounted as gracefully as he could manage. "I imagine not, but I'm here all the same under the king's authority. I seek an audience with my father, if he'll grant it." Ser Adam hesitated, then gestured toward the pavilion. "He's within. Leave your escort outside." Rosen bristled. "We were told." Tyrion raised a hand. "It's all right, Sergeant. Stay here. If I'm not out within an hour, ride for the nearest safe place you can find." Ser Adam studied Rosen with a slight smirk, then lifted the tent flap. Tyrion entered, feeling the warmth of braziers on his face, his heart racing. The pavilion was spacious, lined with fine carpets and hung with crimson drapes. Candles burned on a table in the center, where Tywin Lannister sat, poring over a map. He looked up at Tyrion's approach. His face was hard as chiseled stone, his pale green eyes glinting. Father and son locked gazes. Tywin's armor gleamed in the candlelight, golden lions on the pauldrons. His hair was pale and thinning, receding from a broad forehead. He removed one glove slowly, methodically, and set it aside. "Tyrion," he said at length, in that calm, resonant voice that once made grown men quake, "I see you've come to me of your own accord. Or was it at the king's order?" Tyrion swallowed past the dryness in his throat. "I come as an envoy of King Robert, father, but also as your son, in the hope of sparing us all the horror of war." Tywin regarded him with an unwavering gaze, unblinking. Then he said in a soft, dangerous tone, "You had best speak quickly, then. There is much I would say to you about your betrayal, but we shall see if your words amuse me first." Tyrion stood his ground, though the weight of his father's presence pressed upon him. So the dance began. The fate of the realm, the fate of thousands, might hinge on what passed between them in this tent. He drew in a breath and began, heart-pounding, voice carefully steady. "Very well, let us talk of the king's offer, and whether House Lannister truly wishes to throw the realm into chaos." Outside, the campfires flickered under a moonless sky, while beyond the horizon lay King's Landing, braced for war. The stage was set, the lines drawn, and in that canvas pavilion, with father and son face to face, the future of the Seven Kingdoms hung in the balance.